Good evening, and welcome to tonight's in-person workshop on redistricting for AC Transit. Thank you for joining us this evening. We're so glad you're here. As we go ahead and get started, I'll start with some administrative notes. First, it's important to note that the meeting tonight is being recorded, and that will help so that the recording can be posted to AC Transit's redistricting website, and you can go back and reference it online later on if you'd like, and it'll also be a resource for folks who may have been unable to join us this evening. I'll also note that we do have in-person interpretation available, so we have interpreters here for Cantonese, Mandarin, and Spanish in case anyone would like to take advantage of that interpretation this evening. So next we'll move along to introductions. Again, welcome to this evening's community workshop with education and information on redistricting. My name is Jennifer Nentwig, and I'm a principal with Tripeppi Smith. We're the outreach and engagement firm helping AC Transit with this important issue, and I'm also pleased to be your facilitator here tonight. Here with us tonight, we also have Mr. Michael Wagaman from Wagaman Strategies, the demography firm working with AC Transit. And I'm also pleased to see Director Peoples here with us at this in-person workshop. So we'll move on. Just with a brief overview of today's schedule. So as you can see, it's around 6:30, we are getting started. And first, we will be covering the process, rules, and goals of redistricting in general, just to share some background and context with you on that. Next, we'll be getting into a discussion, really, of neighborhoods and communities of interest. And that's one of the points during the workshop where we are really hoping to hear from you and your input. And next, we'll be going over public mapping and map review tools. And Michael will really walk you through those tools to give you a sense of how they can be used. And we'll wrap up by just covering next steps and how you can continue to be involved. So we'll move on to the next slide. And first, with each workshop, we really like to start off by going over the goals of events like tonight. Through the redistricting process and events like tonight's workshop, we're going to learn from the experts, particularly Michael from Wagaman Strategies. We know that redistricting is a complex process that doesn't take place too often, so it really is an opportunity to educate and explain what the process is and why it's so important. Then the next step is for experts really to listen to you, and that's because we know that community members know communities of interest and neighborhoods best and can really play a key role in sharing that type of information with experts like Michael on the demography front. And lastly, we want to go over mapping tools and other tools with you with the goal of empowering you to give effective feedback. You'll see that there are a variety of participation tools, and we hope that you leave here today and talk with friends and family members about all the different ways that you really can participate and help inform this process moving forward. So we'll move on to the next slide. And I'll just briefly go over the timeline before turning it over to Michael. You can see that there are 5 scheduled hearings in the process, and the first 2 at this point have already taken place. So that first hearing took place on September 6th, and the second hearing took place on September 13th. So we're approaching the halfway mark of this process. Then hearing 3 will come up on October 4th, and that will provide an opportunity to review the proposed plans at that point. Then at the 4th hearing on October 25th, there's an opportunity to further review revised plans and potentially select a final plan. And then hearing 5, taking place November 8th, will provide an opportunity for AC Transit to potentially introduce an ordinance and get that final the final plan in place. So with that, I will turn it over to Michael to dig a little bit more into the phases that are part of this process represented by these hearings here. So Michael, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. And I'll join in welcoming everyone. And, as was noted, you see the timelines for the hearings. There are obviously a series of workshops as well, both before the lines are drawn, which we're doing right now, and then after plans are released. And that process really is designed to work in different phases, and that's on purpose. And before I talk about that, I just want to emphasize, if this feels like a lot happening in a short amount of time, it is. And that's really not necessarily at the the direction of the AC Transit District. State law envisions that once you make the decision to kind of change your electoral method, in this case going from 5 of the 7 board members being elected by wards to 7, all 7 of them being, it wants that process to get done pretty quickly. And so that's what you're seeing in this timeline here, and why we have that. And state law also envisions kind of bifurcating that process where, everybody always wants to get to the end of the story and what are the lines going to look like, but that's really not the way the process is set up. It's set up so that you start by having a series of hearings before lines are drawn. That's the opportunity for the public to really weigh in and really focus on what are the goals. What are we trying to achieve with this process? Because it is a public policy process, and like any public policy, there are trade-offs. And it's important for people to understand when you see a map that may not do exactly what you want, it's why those decisions were being made. And that's why we're going through this today, is really to get that process going of gathering that information. Again, we'll then move in a future phase where at that October 4th hearing, we will have the draft plans that I put together based on board direction. I want to emphasize it's based on that direction and based on that public input, because this is really your process. I'm just a facilitator, just like Jen is our facilitator for this evening. But this is really about what's best for the AC Transit District and the community it serves. At that October 4th meeting, the board will have the plans that I put together along with all the public plans. So as we talk tonight about some of the public plans, if you decide to submit one of your own, that'll be available that evening. And to emphasize, we will treat those exactly the same as anything I draw, because the board really deserves a fair look at everybody's feedback in this process. At that 4th hearing, they'll give additional direction, and then we'll move into refined plans and as Jen noted, hopefully settling on a plan on that October 25th meeting. And if we advance to the next slide, just what is the redistricting process? Fundamentally, again, 5 of the 7 current board members are elected by wards or districts, more commonly known as, and we're moving to all 7 being elected by those. And redistricting is simply the act of redrawing those lines that people are elected from. And it's an important process because how those lines are drawn will affect how people are represented for the rest of the decade. So if we advance, there are a lot of reasons why redistricting happens. I'm sure a lot of people saw redistricting going on a lot in 2020, 2021. That's largely driven by the fact that the census released new data, and that affected everybody who had district or ward boundaries. And this process is really being driven by the California Voting Rights Act, which again is kind of pushing the jurisdiction towards electing all 7 members by ward. But regardless of the reasons why you redistrict, all 3 of these are important, and all 3 of these will impact the process, including very critically that public input. This is that opportunity to say what's working, what's not, what can we do better, and really provide that feedback. So you're really a critical part of this process. And if we advance to the next slide, you see the current ward boundaries here, which are evenly balanced based on population, which is how we draw boundaries here. It's based on population, not registered voters, not eligible voters, not how many pets we have, even though we love them. It is based on people. And you can see they're relatively equally of equal size. The problem that comes up if we move to the next slide is that now we're drawing 7 wards and 2 problems emerge. First, we're missing 2 wards, right? There are 2 wards that don't exist. We only have 5. And the other one is that the existing wards are all too big, because before we were trying to draw wards of about 315,000 people, and now we're trying to draw wards of 225,000. So I draw the analogy of, you imagine if you have a big family gathering, you're trying to make a bunch of meatballs, and you find out your in-laws invited 2 extra people to come over, and now you're having to kind of redivide everything so that everybody has something on their plate. And that's kind of what we're doing here to try to, for those who are visual thinkers. So if we advance to the next slide here, here you see, even though it's been only 2 years since the lines were redrawn, we do have new data that's going to influence this process. So the population numbers are still the same, other than for some little tweaks to adjust for incarcerated populations. But one of the things we look at is citizen voting age population. This is something we look at to make sure we're complying with federal law, particularly the Federal Voting Rights Act. And unlike the census, which is only updated once every decade, this data is actually updated every year. And that's actually important and helpful because it's used in particular to capture demographic changes that have happened. And even in 2 years, we can see how within AC Transit there have been changes, particularly very rapid growth in the AAPI community in South County, which is what you're seeing here. So for those who are involved in 2021, know that a lot of it is going to be the same, but also know that there are a couple things that are a little different here, and that's important to understand. If you see slightly different numbers, it's not a mistake. It's just reflecting that most current data available. One of those things is the information on the citizen voting age population, or CVAP. That comes from a product called the American Community Survey done by the federal government, and it is updated every year. And that data captures demographic trends in those times. One of those is, for example, the rapid expansion of the AAPI Asian community, particularly in South County. And you can see how even in 2 years, there have been changes, and we want to make sure we're capturing those. So those, again, of you who might have been engaged in 2021, you might see new data in 2023. It's not because somebody made a mistake back then or we're making a mistake now. It's just we're adapting to new things as we have new things. We move forward. And here we kind of see the demographics again of those existing wards, their current population data, and all that racial ethnic data. And for those of you who live here in the East Bay, I'm sure it is not a shock to you to know that AC Transit serves a very diverse jurisdiction, a very diverse community and population. And so there's a lot of interest to be dealt with, and folks who have a vested interest in seeing how this process moves forward. And so we advance. There's a whole host of laws that govern this process, all the way from the US Constitution and all the way down to individual cases over the 250 years of the country. There's been redistricting litigation all the way to when the country first started. I'm not going to walk you through all of those pieces. Instead, if we just kind of skip forward. One of the key things that is a part of those requirements, though, is the concept of a community of interest, and making sure that those are captured in this process. So I'm going to turn things back over to Jen, who's going to talk about some of the things, if you are wanting to talk about a community of interest, and then I'll come back and show some of the tools to help the public submit testimony.
Sure, thank you. And there are really two concepts when we're talking about communities of interest. And the first thing to think through is neighborhoods. And so you can see here the questions that really help define neighborhoods. The first one is, what is your neighborhood? So oftentimes someone has a neighborhood name in mind. That's what that first question would be. And then the second question is, what are its geographic boundaries? And when people answer this question, oftentimes they think of physical features that'll define their neighborhood. So whether that may be a highway, a major road, a river, canal, or hill, those are oftentimes the physical features people will use to describe the area of their neighborhood. Sometimes it's the area around a park or a school. So the neighborhood that always goes to X Park, for example, or where kids go to a certain school. And then the next could be other neighborhood landmarks. So sometimes it's a grocery store or a church or things of that nature. And the last note here is just that in the absence of public testimony, sometimes there are other public records that can be factored into this type of process to help see what those different neighborhoods are. And here you can see a little bit more for a definition of communities of interest. So for a community of interest, it's one that shares common interests, brings like people together for representation. And related to communities of interest is the goal of minimizing splits of communities of interest into different wards. So ideally, those should be kept together. And the law generally does not limit the kinds of interests that may build a community or may bind a community. I'm sorry. So you'll see as you look at the tools and the forms to share a community of interest, pretty open-ended. You can really use your own description as far as what that community of interest means to you and why it's a community of interest. Here you can see some community of interest examples. So oftentimes they'll refer to common assets like schools, shopping areas, housing, culture, and language and employment. And as we alluded to on a previous slide, you can also consider existing data. And an example of that could be public transit routes. So that's related in some ways to AC Transit. And there is no definitive data set for what a community of interest would involve. So here we like to try to open it up and get some feedback and input from folks here at the workshops. So the first question when thinking about communities of interest is what defines your community? So as we've touched upon, that involves the geographic area, plus the shared issue or characteristic, and those could be the shared social or economic interest, and how they're impacted by district policies. And then lastly, tell us your community's story. And I really like what Michael shared in, I think, our first workshop, which was really thinking through the boiled down bullets of what, where, and why. So what is your community of interest? Where is it? And why is it community of interest? And then the second question there is just thinking through, would this community benefit from being included within a single district for purposes of its elected, effective, and fair representation? So at this point, we'll see if anyone here at the workshop tonight does want to share any input. Here on this slide, you can see the questions on neighborhoods. So what is your neighborhood and what are its boundaries? What are other notable areas and what are their boundaries? So maybe if not your own neighborhood, maybe you have strong feelings on what a neighborhood is within AC Transit. And then here we have a whole host of questions on communities of interest. There's a lot of questions here, so I can leave this up for a minute and we'll pause to see if any of our workshop attendees would like to share. Yep, if you can, please come up to the dais and we'll get you on the microphone. Or not to the dais, but to the podium.
Sure. How much time do I have?
We have an open forum here, so go for it.
Great. Because there are quite a few communities that I talked to up and down the whole district that I want to bring out, and also based on some of the other comments I saw on the district website. So why don't we start at the top of the district? Alfred, oh yeah, sorry. My name is Alfred Chu. I live in Berkeley, California. So starting at the top, Contra Costa County has been something where people said this is a community of interest. You want to make sure there's at least one person on the board from Contra Costa County. And the reason for that is the way our transit funding is done on Alameda County will have its own ballot measure, Contra Costa will have its own ballot measures. So there's no one on board from Contra Costa County that can speak to that representation of that area. I guess one question I have is how close to the ideal number should the population?
Yeah, we can answer that. And I'll repeat it for the microphone just in case. We're going to answer how close the demographic number should be for each.
Sure, and this came up at a previous workshop, and unfortunately, as with many things in redistricting, there's not clean and clear answers. It used to be that the courts said that there was a safe harbor, in essence, as they called it, if you were within a total deviation of 10%, so that's plus or minus 5%. The courts have later clarified that that doesn't mean that you're just fine to do that just willy-nilly, that you have to have a reason why you have larger deviations. And you can have a lot of reasons why those are. Things like communities of interest, like county and city boundaries, like topography and geography. So there's a lot of reasons why. So you want to have a reason why you have a larger deviation. If you have a deviation more than that, plus or minus 5%, the courts have said that invites stricter scrutiny. So, it's in essence, a higher bar you would have to get over if you went over those pieces. So For this jurisdiction, if the ideal district is about 225,000, that's basically plus or minus about 12,000 from that. So 213,000 to 228,000 or so.
Okay. Yeah, that's what we use for the note, because the population of the Contra Costa County portion of AC Transit is a little bit under that 225,000 number. If the city of Albany is added in, that brings it to around 226,000 people. So it's just right about where we want it to be. And because of the way the district is drawn, the only option for extending the Contra Costa district would be either to take part of Berkeley or to take the entirety of Albany, because Albany is a much smaller city. And there are some good reasons to group Albany with the rest of Contra Costa County, and one of them is transportation. So in addition to AC Transit, BART is one of the main transit agencies in our area. And one of the BART stations, El Dorado Plaza, is almost right on the Albany border. And so it serves people both in El Dorado, which is Contra Costa County, but also in the city of Albany. Moving on down to the next potential district, which I like to call District 51B, or Warren 61B, because of the 51B bus, which is one of the most highly patronized bus lines in the district. One of the other members of the public I saw had sent in a comment about how Berkeley is a community of interest that's kept together in one ward. And reflecting on that, it does make a lot of sense. Did land out that Berkeley has its own transportation department, and it's very much built around the university community where people that go to school there or work there. And it's also a much more high voter turnout, highly educated, highly politically involved community. Now, Berkeley is only about half the people you would need for a whole district. So the next question is about who should we group as Berkeley? And some potential ideas like be Emeryville. So Emeryville, we like to say, it started out because all the chain stores that Berkeley wouldn't allow to open in Berkeley city limits, they opened in Emeryville. That's why we have the IKEA, the movie theater, shopping center. And now that Berkeley doesn't have any movie theaters left other than a small Elmwood theater, for most of the mainstream movies, a lot of people in Berkeley go to Emeryville for movies, shopping, and other activities. There's also a lot of overlapping employment. Both West Berkeley and Emeryville have a large biotech, life sciences employment. Another potential area to include would be the Oakland Hills and Piedmont. And these areas share a lot in common with the Berkeley Hills. Both of them were built as single-family residential neighborhoods over 100 years ago, but they were also designed as streetcar suburbs. The predecessor agency to AC Transit, the T system, they would have these streetcars that ran up the Berkeley Hills, the Piedmont, the Oakland Hills to take people to work. And so it built up these neighborhoods that were aimed at wealthier office commuters and often still that case today. And so that would fit in nicely with the more highly educated universities around Berkeley as well. One thing to note about Berkeley is that because of the university, the university itself, the students are much more diverse than the city as a whole. There's a much larger Latino, Asian American community going to UC Berkeley. And at first, it may hear, okay, why are we isolating these voters in the middle of this majority white war? And part of it is that they are a little bit geographically cut off from, say, Oakland, Chinatown, or Fruitvale. But the other thing is that a lot of them are registered to vote outside of school. AC Transit District. There's students from elsewhere and hand voter registration in other parts of the state or country even. And if you look at the local elections in Berkeley, you'll see there are very few people who are actually voting from these neighborhoods. And so there's less of a concern of the vote dilution in that area. Oh, I see on here you wrote Oakland Coast Fremont. It should be Piedmont. Piedmont is the little donut hole in the middle of Oakland. All right. So the next one is what I call the 51A district. And this is the area that covers a lot of downtown Oakland, Alameda, and this is one of those districts where it's right in the middle of everything. So there's a lot of places that could go in one way or the other as far as which of the Oakland districts goes in. But some of the key communities of interest in this area, we have Koreatown in North Oakland. We have the San Antonio neighborhood, which has a lot of our Southeast Asian community. We have Oakland Chinatown. We have West Oakland. And then we have the whole city of Alameda. And one of the things with Alameda and how it relates to the Chinatown and Oakland is because Chinatown is a very geographically compact area. In the last 40, 50 years, as more immigration arrived in the East Bay, and not everyone could fit in Chinatown anymore. People started moving to Alameda, especially the Bay Farm Island. So that makes sense why Alameda and Oakland Chinatown might be grouped together in a community of interest, even though if you look at the urban form, they're very different. One is a high density, high rise neighborhood, the other one is forest urban. There's another non-ethnic related community that could form part of this 51A form, and that is Oakland's LGBTQ community. There are a lot of gay bars and queer bars in downtown Oakland, uptown Oakland area. And then over by the Grand Lake area, there are the Oakland LGBTQ Center and a few other community spaces. And so it would make sense to put that all together in this downtown centric district. All right. Moving on down, the next one I call the Ward 1B, the 1G district, which is around East Oakland. So a lot of it is along the bus rapid transit line on International Boulevard. And one thing with this ward is, I imagine this ward would be entirely made up of Oakland. And what this would do is it would guarantee that at least one member of the board is from Oakland, which is the largest city in the Eastern District. So with this ward, some of the considerations include that most of it is in the flatland. But if you get down to the southernmost part of the Oakland Hills, you also have a large African American community living up in that area. And in order to make sure that we have a Black community or within the AC Transit District, it would make sense to group that part of the Oakland Hills with the rest of the East Oakland, or similar to how the Oakland City Council district maps have been drawn, where for the Oakland City Council, they have much smaller districts, of course, but they put the Oakland Hills in one area, but then the southernmost part of the Oakland Hills are part of the East Oakland Council district. All right. The next area is what I call Ward 10, which is along the AC Transit Line 10, which runs from San Leandro down to Hayward. And for this one, again, we have a large Chinese American community in this area, both in San Leandro as well as in Castro Valley. And while Oakland Chinatown is a much older Chinese American community, this one is a bit newer, where more people who moved here the last 20, 30 years, as opposed to people who've been here for multiple generations. And then one way to think about this district also is it would also have with Castro Valley, which is more, even though it's called a valley, it's really more of the hills. If you look at the actual topography, it's much more hillier and elevated, which has a lot of implications for transit service because lines have to be more indirect. It's also a bit lower population density. And you see a similar type of urban planning down in the Hayward Hills, Fairview area, that it would make sense to combine Castro Valley with those neighborhoods. As far as the population goes, Hayward would likely need to be split. And there are a couple of potential places to divide Hayward. One of them is along the railroad track. And this I found based on the neighborhood map that the city of Hayward puts out. A lot of them have the neighborhoods split along the railroad tracks that run along different streets. Another option would be Mission Boulevard, which is the main north-south street in this area. And moving on further south, we have what I call Ward 97, which is named after the 97th Asparagan Boulevard. And this one includes a lot of the Hayward Flatland and also Ashland and Cherryland. So Ashland and Cherryland are also unincorporated areas, but they are much more urban than, say, Castro Valley. They have a lot more apartment buildings, higher transit ridership, lower income community. And this Ward 97, I also mentioned, running down by Bay, where most of the industrial areas, Hayward, down in Newark, are located. And this is also the most likely candidate for a Latino opportunity district, where the actual Latino population is even higher. The citizen age voting population is around 35, 34% area. And that includes the city of Newark, which has a relatively large Latino population as well. And finally, we had the Fremont district in Ward 210. This is named after the 210 bus on Fremont Boulevard. So I know at an earlier meeting there came up the question of, can we put the whole city of Fremont in one ward? And part of it is that you have to cut out part of it because Newark is the donut here. But fortunately, most of the Bay side, the west side of Fremont, is all industrial area or nature reserve. So nobody actually lives there. And so that's a good way you can take out some parts of Fremont so you can make the adjacent district contiguous between Newark and Hayward. The boundary, conveniently enough, is Highway 880. There are very few people that live in Fremont west of 880, except in the Ardenwood neighborhood. So that is one neighborhood where, even though it's just below 880, it's still very much connected with the rest of Fremont, especially with creating Asian American district. You would want to include the Ardenwood and Northgate neighborhoods in Fremont. They are kind of centered around a shopping center on Fremont Boulevard and the Vail Pocket, where there's a supermarket, lunch bars. The other interesting thing about Fremont has to do with how the census categorizes certain populations. So Fremont is known as one of the centers of the African American community, and there's also immigrants from other parts of the Southwest Asia, Middle East. But the census classifies these people as white, even though politically, culturally, they have a lot more common with the other Asian American ethnicities that census classifies as Asian, whether it's people from India or Southeast Asia or China. You have a lot of similar experiences where people immigrated to this country very recently, have English as a second language, a lot of refugee populations. And those are one of the things where the four-way ratio data might not really capture what's going on on the ground in this area. Fremont does have another cluster that has a larger white population in the Niles district, which is the historic part of Fremont from a long time ago. And that is actually more people who are from European ancestry that people might normally think of when they see the categories on the map as labeled as white. But if you look at all the different political organizations we have in our area, whether it's the Asian American political groups, a lot of them will include people from Southwest Asia who are categorized by white in the census, but have more in common with the rest of the Asian American population. And in the case of Fremont, we see that the most in the Centerville neighborhood, which is around the Fremont campus, which is down. Yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up. I sent in a map earlier and made a second version of it. And I've seen some more comments come in and more communities of interest on fine. So I'll probably put together the third version as well. Sometime this week that you'll have before the 20th. Then thank you so much for leading this process. Have a great evening.
Of course, thank you so much for that insightful feedback. Any questions from our demographer or thoughts on the feedback? Okay, we will take that into account.
I think the only thing I would note for members of the public, we do have tools we're going to walk through. And I know there are folks who are submitting, multiple options, and as they learn more from the members of the community too, we're seeing the feedback they're seeing from their community members. Again, all the public plans and all that stuff will be digitized and prepared for consideration of the board. If there's any member of the public who has submitted a plan and then let's say after hearing one is like, oh, you know what, I've actually changed my mind. I really think this is the better option. You can submit multiple plans if you so desire. If there's a plan you submitted that you don't think is now the right choice, I would suggest you may want to send that feedback in before the 20th and saying, I withdraw this plan, I prefer this plan, just so we aren't presenting options to the board that you actually don't support.
All right, well, thank you. We'll go ahead and move on then. And that's an excellent segue because now we are going over the public mapping and map review tools. So I'll turn the slides over to you, Michael.
And so, so this is the website. I don't know how you maximize in that thing. Sorry, I'm not a Apple person. So this is the website that we have for the public to submit testimony. There's a whole host of options. I'll kind of work through from the least complicated to the most complicated. I won't take too much time on it because a lot of folks have already seen that, and we've walked through and some of the other options. The kind of easiest way to engage is to submit a community of interest, because you don't have to really know anything about how this board is elected. You don't have to necessarily care about how this board is elected to say, this is my community. This is this is the what, where, and why we talked about earlier. And so the easiest way to do that is actually there's a paper tool on the website, which you can see, which is just a one-page document with one page of instructions, and then just an option to literally get on the piece of paper and draw the where, write down the what, and describe the why. And there's multiple pages there. So if you want to do different zooms, you have that option to kind of work your way through and say, this is what I want to show you don't have to fill out every single page. Again, just pick out the page that works best for you to describe your community. And then I don't know how we go back to the main page. Name. Okay. We're sharing technology tonight, so we're a little less sophisticated than we just hand things back and forth. There you go. So then the second option, if you want to submit a community of interest, is that you can use the online tool. The online tool, there we go, is just literally kind of think about it as like paint by numbers when you used to do it, if you did that ever as a kid, where you can go in and you can literally just take this and there's a paintbrush and go in and just start coloring in and filling in your district, and you can kind of see it filling in blue. There's options to change the size of your paintbrush. You can erase and kind of just start filling in that community of interest. Again, always making sure to give it that name and the description, so we have not only the where, but the what and the why as part of that process. The other option then is if folks are kind of redistricting nerds, as some people here might be tonight, that you can submit your own plan. That can be for one ward or for all 7 wards. You're not limited. It's kind of how engaged do you want to be. As before, there is a paper option that you can use where you can go in and just literally what here you see here is 150 what we call slices of ways to divide up the community. And on the second page for each slice, there's the population of it. And you can go in and just start looking at those slices and start adding them up, whether you do it with a calculator or a computer or an abacus, and start adding up the population of a ward. For those who don't have computers, don't like computers, this is again, a paper option for submitting that information. There's also an Excel tool on the website. That option means that instead of you having to add up the numbers yourself, it just does it in Excel, and there's just a column and you just enter in the word number for each slice and it adds it all up. Again, those slices, there's about 150 of those. There's actually about 17,000 census blocks that make up the district or the ward, or sorry, the jurisdiction. And those are all available to you. If you want to use those, then you want to go back to kind of our most sophisticated tool, which is again the online option. And instead of, and just like before where we were kind of painting by numbers, here you have that same option to draw a district, except now instead of having just one color, you have 7 colors. And what you'll start seeing is as we start drawing and filling in, you're going to see that population number starting to fill in. And you're going to start getting closer and closer to that ideal number, that 225,000. For the question that was earlier, if you're trying to figure out how much over or under you are, it's going to start telling you that deviation numbers down there as well. And then you can start filling in additional districts, coloring in, and just drawing those until you end up with 7 different words. And then there's the option to save those and publish those. And what you will see on the website is that as the public submit those, you'll see both those communities of interest and those publicly submitted plans. So that's always an option too, if you've been thinking about it, but there's not, you don't want to actually deal it yourself. If you just see the plan that you like on there, you're able to go through, see what your fellow community members have done and just say, I like plan 19 blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to call a number because I'm not favoring anybody yet. Because I don't, at the end of the day, this is really a community process. I am just a facilitator, and it's not my decision to make. It's my role in this is to really aid the public and aid the board in figuring out what's going to work best for the jurisdiction for the next 10 years. So again, there are a whole host of options that are available. Before I move off, I just want to emphasize, we've kind of shown you those fancy, sophisticated tools. There's also a lot of options that are easier, which are just as with any public policy decision. If you have feedback, you can email it in. That information's on the website. If you want to call in, there's a phone number to call in between meetings and during all the hearings of the AC Transit Board. There's a Zoom option so people can call in and testify that way too. So for those members of the public who may have disability issues or access issues, those normal ways that you're able to participate in public decision making remain a part of this process as well. So even though we spent most of our time talking about the fancy special tools, the other ones are all still available as part of this because it is, again, just another public policy decision. With that, I'll turn things back to Jen.
All right, we'll go back to our slides. Thank you, Michael. Okay, so following the presentation of the mapping tools, we like to pause here and just see if there are any questions on the tools or really any of the information shared about the overall process. Any questions on that? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on. And we're looking ahead now to see what some upcoming workshops are in this first phase, if you will. So looking ahead, the in-person workshop on September 30th will take place at the Fremont Family Resource Center. We're really hoping to see folks at that one down in Fremont. It'll start at 2 p.m. and it will cover much of what was covered today, but it will also be a chance to have a sneak peek of the proposed plans. As Michael mentioned, those are due on September 20th, and they'll go before the board at hearing 3. So they will be available for that September 30th workshop. And what we'll be emphasizing at that workshop is take a look at these plans and please participate in hearing 3 to share your feedback with the board and share your feedback in these other feedback mechanisms that we'll cover again here shortly too. So those are the workshops in the first phase. And then looking ahead, the second round of workshops will include 2 virtual workshops, one Monday, October 12th at 6:30 and another Tuesday, October 17th at 6:30. These will have even more different content. So again, the plans will be out there and it'll really present an opportunity to share the plans and then also mention, that they've been shared with the board and any additional direction or feedback that we might have to share at that point. And we'll wrap up here just by emphasizing ways that people can continue to participate. So that website we've been referring to is actransit.org/redistricting. It's a great one-stop shop for all your redistricting needs. You can find all the tools that we went through, as well as background information, schedule, events, resources for all the different events, and frequently asked questions. So we hope that you'll visit that page and find what you need there. You can also always email, and that email address is myvoice@actransit.org. And then the phone number, as Michael mentioned, that's available to you is 510-891-7192. So we hope that folks participate, share your input. We hope to see folks at upcoming events. And I'll turn it over to Michael to see if there's anything else you'd like to conclude with this evening.
We'll be seeing you more.
Yeah, so thanks again for your participation. And with that, that concludes our workshop this evening. Thank you.